Oh.
And we moved to Indiana because he was traveling a lot and we'd just been married. I'm like, we can't do this anymore. So we moved to South Bend, Indiana. And same thing happened. This was November. And they're like, well, do you want to substitute teach until we have an opening? Da, da, da. Then they said, hey, we have an opening for a new classroom. And they called it cross categorical. And basically, it was just a dumping ground for kindergarten through six and for kids who had been identified with special needs, but they had no place to put them. This would have
It
been in
was basically
80,
school
88, 89.
of rejects, we could say.
Yeah. And this was 88, 89. So we're talking a good 15 years since the laws have been in place. You know, you'd think things would have gotten better. And so I'm like, okay, well, okay, how much worse can it be than where I was at? And so I had K through six, and it worked, you know, and that's when I learned that all kids don't respond to positive behavior thing. Like when you say, "Oh, good job, man, that was great," and the kid looks up beaming at you like they do on TV, you know, like, "Hey!" That doesn't always happen. I had one that if you told him good job, like let's say you say, "Okay, everybody get out your math books and we're going to start," and you say, "Oh, good job. I'm glad to see you're doing that." He'd put his book away. So I had to come up with some new systems because this kid was not going to fall for the typical good job stuff. And so I did. And so I was there. And they also said, after I took the job, they said, oh, by the way, you can have $300 for books or supplies, but not both.
Oh.
I said, and this served me well in 2020, let me tell you, because I said, give me supplies. I can teach without books. This was before the internet. This was before you could print things off the internet.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I can teach without books. Give me supplies. So that's what I spent my money on. The custodian sees me. And he, for some reason, really decided he liked me. He goes, come here one night. One night after school, he's like, come here. He takes me to his room. And it's filled with textbooks, math, science, reading. And he said, I was told to burn these. Do you want them? I said, oh, yeah. I had some of them up until about 5 or 6 years ago still. And I used these books that were going to be burned for these kids.
There's something wrong with that picture.
Special education students can't get books, can't get things you need. So you fly by the seat of your pants. You know, yeah, it was very wrong. But I made it work. And so at the end of the year, I was like, they would have let me stay. But I was like, I don't know. I don't know how I found out about it. I don't know why to this day I did this. But I heard about half an hour from where we lived in South Bend and down in Plymouth, Indiana, there was a drug and alcohol treatment center down there for teenage drug addicts, inpatient. And I was like, So I applied for it. And I got it. I was the teacher, again, in a hospital setting, drug and alcohol treatment center for teenage drug addicts.
Well, that had to be a challenge.
It was interesting. And as I started to get to know these guys and started to work with them, they were from all different, again, from Michigan, Wisconsin, Indiana. Um, and I was like, well, this is different. This is kind of interesting. But their story's always the same. And again, a lot of their stories were like my story. And so I started working with them. Well, then there were a couple of them who would only respond to me. So also became an on call detox counselor. When the kids were going through detox and really struggling, they would call me in the middle of the night to go down there and work with these guys. And so I would again work with their schools to get them back in school, change schools if need be, so that they wouldn't be near their drug friends.
So they
And
were basically failing school because of their addictions.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so I would work with their schools and I would push and advocate for them to go to a different school than their home school because it's well proven that if you go back to the same situation with the same friends, you're going to start using again.
Yeah.
And so I would push for that and push for that and push for that and really advocate for them that this needs to happen. I was offered a job in two or three different school districts after my year there, but I was pregnant and my husband had found a job up here in Grand Rapids. And so we were going to move. And so I said, I really can't take any of these jobs. So I moved and we moved up here and I my teaching certificates back then had expired in Michigan, and so I had to work on my master 18 plus hours. Now you have to have a master's. Back then you could just take 18 hours and you could be fine. So I took the 6 months or so before our daughter was born and got some classes. And then I took a year off. This would have been a 90. I took a year off and worked on my master's, 18 hours. I got two more teaching certificates, but at that point. So now I have seven. I was now certified in all those areas, plus learning disabilities and emotionally impaired. And so in 91, because of a decision I made in 80, 84 or 85 when I left, I said, I'm quitting Grand Rapids. I'm moving to Ohio. They said, well, are you quitting? Or are you going on sabbatical? And I said, well, what's the difference? And they said, well, if you go on sabbatical, we'll hire you again. But if you don't, then if you quit, we won't hire you back. And so I said, well, put me on sabbatical. Who cares? You know? And so a few years later, I go back and I'm like, hey, wait a minute. I went back to Grand Rapids and guess what? They hired me.
So in a sense, you can say if you don't make that option, they pretty much blackball you.
That's what they said they would do. And so I'm like, well, okay, and it also helped me in my retirement because I got those 2 years in Grand Rapids Public Schools towards my retirement with
Yeah.
the state of Michigan. So because I didn't quit, it helped with that. And I'm also on the old retirement system because it's been changed many times. Because I made that decision, it kept all that in place for me. So I get thrown into an emotionally impaired EI classroom with Grand Rapids Public Schools. And I did that for 2 years. And I thought, okay, I've been doing special ed for a long time. I wonder what it's like to teach, well, I'm going to say, for lack of a better word, normal kids. And so,
There such thing nowadays.
where is it? And so I applied and got a job at Alger and with a sixth grade class. And that was a riot. And I was scared to death. Move me to Ohio, move me to Indiana, give me inner city in Ohio with a badly behaved, put me in regular ed. And I was scared to death. And back then, they used, remember the old overheads with the transparency sheet and everything? And my students would ask me, why do you use that? Why don't you use the chalkboard? Because that's what it was at the time. And I said, do you think I'm going to turn my back on you? So that was fun. I am still friends with some of those students I had back then. Still friends. And this would have been in like 93, 94. So what, about 20, 30 years ago? And I'm still friends with some of them. And they live all over the country. They've done many, many things. They're social workers. They've been in the armed forces. They've just, it's really cool because I'm still friends. I go to baby showers. I've been to weddings. And so I did sixth grade for 10 years, for no, let's see. Yeah, 10 years. Was it 10? Five. Sorry, five, because I got to think how long I was there. 5 years. And as you can probably already tell from talking to me, I'm not normal, right? And so, like when we were reading, and all of a sudden there was a play in the book, I was like, well, this is boring just reading a play and only listening to a few kids read. So we would turn it into a real play and we would perform it during the day and at night. And we charge a nickel for everybody to come in at night and during the day. And we saved enough money over the year to take a charter bus to Greenfield Village and Henry Ford Museum.
That is so cool.
Places they'd never been, Lansing, places like that. And so we do these plays, costumes. They learned how to sew, they learned how to make costumes. And so then we kind of branched beyond that. One time we did one called Music Through the Ages, and we started out with like music from the Revolutionary War all the way up through current music, and the kids would dress up. And I had one young man who you could tell when he walked in he was trouble. And he sat right in the front seat, the front row. And we were doing this play, and I wanted somebody that would do If I Were a Rich Man from Fiddler on the Roof, because that was one of the songs we are going to do. And so we're going through it. And I said, well, do you have a suit? He goes, yep, I have my Easter suit. It's purple. I said, oh, hey. Well, we found out he had a beautiful baritone singing voice. And he ran through the audience throwing Monopoly money as he's singing the song. And that March at parent teacher conferences, his mom came to parent teacher conferences and was crying because I said, your son is wonderful. I said, I enjoyed teaching him so much. And she had been to the music play, and she started crying, and she goes, this is the first time in 6 years anybody has said something nice about my son.
You tapped into that good person.
Yep.
Past that, that shield he always kept up, apparently.
Yep. So then after that for 5 years, I moved down to fifth grade. They needed a fifth grade teacher. So I moved down to fifth grade. So, oh, what the heck? Yeah, I'll try that. Same thing. I did the same thing with these guys. I did with my sixth graders. But it's teacher autonomy. And I tell you, I'm the biggest advocate for teacher autonomy. And so much of our autonomy has been taken away to do what you need to do what these kids did. Like one time they all failed a math test. And I stood up in front of them and I said, y'all failed this math test. And I said, you know what that means? And they went, yeah, we're dumb. Yeah, we're dumb. I said, no. I said, it means I did something wrong. I didn't do something right. We need to revisit this and do it again. And we did, and they all passed the test. You don't have that now. Teachers are told that you teach it. If they fail it, keep going because they're going to pick it up eventually. And it all goes back to let me do it the way I know how to do it and forget the system. And it just has been my whole mantra through 37 years.
So you're saying in today's teaching world, they make it more robotic like.
Absolutely. And so I chose till the very bitter end to do it my way. And I'm going to do it my way, and don't tell me that it's wrong if it's working. And those fifth graders had the highest test scores ever because I did it my way.
Yeah, well, there be something to it then.
There, I totally believe that. And teachers are so trained now to follow the system, follow what the district tells you, follow what the state tells you. And there's sometimes where you have to put your foot down on somebody's head, and say, no, I'm not going to do it. And my favorite story to that comes later. So I did that for 10 years. And then I thought, okay, I never told these guys, these 10 years of fifth and sixth graders, that I was a special education teacher. Never told them. And just a few years ago, I was talking to one of them, and I said, did you realize I was a special ed teacher when I had you? She goes, no, never knew. She says, I thought you were just a fun teacher. And So just all like the story of the raising that money and doing that. One time I got really mad at them, and I was co-teaching with a special ed teacher, and we were both really mad. We were gone. The kids had acted up, so we came in dressed as our own substitute teachers, and Mrs. Dorfork and Mrs. Trebolo. And they didn't know who we were. We had wigs and full makeup, you name it. And there's a picture floating around somewhere of it. I think it's on my Facebook. And yeah, the kids didn't act up after that.
Hello, my name is Scott and I have lived independently now for 30 years with cerebral palsy. Thank you for visiting my channel Scott in the System. I have a podcast by the same name. I talk to mostly nonprofit services for the disabled community. I also like to talk about being an entrepreneur affiliate marketer. If you would like to be on my podcast, you can email me at scott@scottinthesystem.com. Be sure to visit my website as at www.scottinthesystem.com. Please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel as well. Thank you for dropping by and have a blessed day.
So, yeah. And so then I thought, well, I think I want to go back to special education for a while, go back to my roots. So I moved to Kenosha, and I'm sure you've heard of Kenosha.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I took a fifth and sixth grade class of POHI kids, physically and otherwise health impaired kids, who were in regular education. I co-taught with a fifth and a sixth grade teacher. And again, I had to stomp on some heads to do what was right. And I know this young man does not mind at all if I share his name or his story. Um, he was 10 at the time. He is now 30, and we go out to dinner, and I still see him. And he
This
was
must be Dominic, I'm guessing.
he's supposed to be what?
I,
Dominic? No, it's not
no,
Dominic. His name was Herb.
oh, okay.
And Herbert knows Dominic. They know each other
Oh,
because now I'm starting to cross paths with that with those two are about the same age. Dominic's a little bit younger,
oh,
and so he was in regular education. He has actually written his story, and he was failing everything. And I went to my principal at the time and I said, he's failing. I want to bring him back with me full time. And the principal says, no, you can't, because the money's already been allocated to the regular education teacher and we would lose money. And I said, since when is this about money?
oh, that's so sad.
And it was. And so, you probably already know me well enough to know that that's not going to fly with me. So I went to his mother, who was a huge advocate for him, and I said, look, this is what I want to do. I want to bring him back with me. Not permanently. I said, but to get his feet underneath him. And she said, okay. So the time came for his IEP, and
Could
we
you,
did it.
could you tell us what that stands for?
Yeah, individual educational plan.
Okay.
It's what's written for a student with the disabilities. It's a little bit higher level than a 504. A 504 gives them the assistance they need to participate in regular education, like maybe a set of books at home, extra time for test taking, someone to write for them. But an IEP actually sets goals that must be met. You have to review it a minimum of once a year. The parents get a report 4 times a year on how they are doing. And it has to be adhered to. It's a legal binding document between the school and the parent.
Okay.
So I wrote it in his IEP. He was going, and you have to put times in there. They're going to be in regular ed this much and special ed this much. I put 100% my class. I got a little trouble for that. But because it was a legal binding document, the district signed off on it. Guess what? And so I wasn't afraid. By this time, I'd been teaching, I don't know how long, and 10, 15 years. And I'm like, no, I'm not playing that. And it's a little bit of my grandma in me, I think.
Oh,
And yeah,
ultimately, doesn't a parent have the ultimate authority in that situation?
Ideally, you'd like it to be a partnership. It depends on what the parent is asking for, what the district is can provide, and who's willing to fight harder for it. My idea was always to talk to the parents before the meeting and say, look, this is what I'm thinking. This is where I see things going, and get the parents' agreement before the meeting.
So you're basically their advocate with the education board.
Correct.
Okay.
And so once we got that agreed on, then I would set the meeting and it was all done. It just depends on the district you're working for, the parent. Some parents bring in very high priced, high powered advocates, which is fine. But if I always felt if I was doing my job, they didn't need an advocate with them. And so I did this with this parent. I said, this is what I want to do. And it's not permanent, and so on and so forth. And the parent, I asked the parent years later, I said, why? Because I'm still friends with this parent too. And I said, why did you agree to this? And she goes, because I believed in you. And fast forward, this young man, I got him situated through high school with some support he might have needed. He graduated as the top male student of his year from Ottawa High School. He went to GRCC. He got a degree in accounting from there. I helped him through the GRASP program to help pay for it. Same thing, scholarships and GRASP through Grand Valley. He transferred to Grand Valley. He got a bachelor's degree in small business administration, I think, or something like that. And he is now an accountant.
Good for him.
And I just had.
I'll be the first one to tell you that when I got my business degree, I ended up having to take basic accounting twice.
It was a struggle. And I find my students, if they stay in touch with me, I find them tutors. I tutor them myself. Even once the internet really got rocking and you could do meetings and stuff, I would have open times where I'd have my computer on and the kids could come in and get help with their regular ed classes. This was, gosh, 15 years ago I was doing this. And so he is one of my big success stories. I have another young man who just finished a stint in CC and started his first day yesterday at Grand Valley in journalism.
Wow.
And so, it can be done. And never say never at all. I have another young man who is 26. He is working towards his GED. He just passed his third GED test and he's getting primed to take his fourth and last one, and he will have his GED.
Yeah. Yes. I guess me and today's teachers are taught to be more robotic as we discussed.
You follow the rules. And I think part of it's the way I was raised. My grandmother was, like I said, she was one of the first women police officers in Michigan. She broke ground. And my other grandmother was a teacher. And so I kind of follow their example. And if I'm going to get somebody mad at me, well, I'm going to do a darn good job at it, aren't I? So what this young man, Herbert, I had him for fifth and sixth grade. And then they had an opening. They reopened the brand new Elger building and they were moving the middle school program from Iroquois to Elger. And they needed another teacher for the Pohai program. I said, I'll do it. So I moved up there with these same kids. And I did that for a few years. A friend of mine came in as my co-teacher. We had a rockin' program because by then technology had kind of caught up with our brains, my friend and I's brains. Her name is Anne. And we started incorporating Kindles and Bookshare.org. I don't know if you've ever heard of Bookshare. Um, I was a representative for that company for a long time. But we started incorporating read alouds to the kids. And again, we were told that's not reading. When they're listening to books, they're not reading. So my friend Ann and I,
That's what I do most of the time.
yep, my
It's
friend
because,
Ann,
it's,
I'm
be-
sorry.
it's because my reading ability with my eyes are slow with the
Mm-hmm.
cerebral palsy, and I
Yep.
read the same lines periodically, so I get frustrated.
Yep. So what we did is we kind of did the middle finger kind of thing when they told us that it wasn't reading. And so our parents were very supportive, and they would buy Kindles for their students based upon our recommendation. And bookshare.org at that time, and what that is, bookshare.org, check it out. And anybody that listens to this podcast, check it out. It's a free resource as long as you are in school and have an IEP until you're 26. And it is free, millions and millions of books, textbooks you download for free, and you put them on your Kindle or any electronic reader. At that time, there was only one electronic reader that would work with. But we figured out how to finagle the files to make them work on Kindles. And then after you're done with school and IEP, there's a small fee every year, and it gives you access to textbooks, scientific books, college textbooks, as well as pleasure reading K through adult. And they're constantly adding more. There's millions and millions. It's a great resource.
Now,
And
is this a little bit different than the books for the braille and the blind?
correct. Braille books come more from the Commission for the Blind.
Okay.
And now the library has audiobooks too. They have a huge selection. My niece is a librarian for KDL, and they have tons and tons of downloadable also audiobooks. So what my friend and I started doing, Ann and I started doing is we called it our Kindle project, is we started collecting data on every kid every week to see if reading by listening and following, because it highlights as it reads, was helping their reading. And guess what we found out?
They were comprehending it better.
They were also learning how to read better, because when we would test them, the first thing that happened was their vocabulary shot through the roof, that they could read, the words that they could read and understand. Then their comprehension from reading, not listening, but reading, was starting to go up.
Well, I'm a big believer. I feel like I fell a little short in comparison to my own parents.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, I've been reading a lot of like Dr. Ben Carson
Yep.
books.
Oh yeah, I've heard of Ben Carson. Yep. And so we kept data on that for years. We presented all over the state on this project we had where we're collecting all this data, and went, don't tell us that Kindles is not reading, and so don't tell us that this is not going to happen. So we did it anyway. So we did that program for a few years, and then in Grand Rapids decided that it was not going to be a program anymore, and they disbanded the program as the kids went to high school. So Ann and I had to find new jobs. Um,
Well, that's too bad because if they implemented it, maybe, future classes could prosper as well.
so we heard about these two new classrooms that were opening up, one at Elger and one at Burton, and they called them cross-categorical classrooms. See if this sounds familiar. It was a dumping ground for students who they didn't know what to do with. So they asked me if I wanted one of them, and I said, I'll take the Elger. I liked middle school. I didn't really care. Ann was more elementary. She took the one at Burton. So we met with HR, and I said to them, I said, fine, I will do it. But I'm doing it my way. I said, don't tell me how to do it. Don't tell me what to do, when to do it. I said, because you already told me these kids has been given up on. and nobody else wants to teach them, I will do it, but I'm going to do it my way.
Yeah, well, I don't see how they could argue that
They
if
didn't.
everybody failed precedingly. So,
Yeah. So I took this class over, and again, they were hardcore kids. Some of them were foster kids. You know, and again, I had the obligatory student that no matter what you asked them to do, they would just sit there and do nothing. And okay, how are we going to deal with this? And so I continued my Kindle project with them. And those kids would bring me in, like, by then I'd met a man who would buy Kindles at yard sales and online and then sell them to me for what he paid for them. He was retired, great. His name is Ken, great guy. And so the kids, I would buy them from him. Then the kids would bring in pop cans and quarters, pennies, whatever they had to pay me. And then once they paid me the money back for it, it was their Kindle to have and take home. And one of the young men comes in one day and he goes, "Yeah, my dad was yelling at me for playing video games on my tablet, but then I showed him I was reading." Ha 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 ha. And it was simple stuff like during state testing, we all hear about state testing and the MEP and all that. Is these kids couldn't sit at a desk and MEP test. Guess what? They sat in beanbags and took their MEP test. What's the difference? And they tried to call me out on it and say, well, they need to be sitting at a desk. Why? Why? What's the difference between sitting at a beanbag or a desk, you know? And so one of my favorite stories out of that class is the young man who would sit there and do nothing and just kind of go, nope, not doing it. Nope, not doing it. I hired him to mow our lawn. And one day he's here mowing my lawn and I saw him stop and go to the front of the lawnmower and reach down and pick something up. He was picking up a toad because he didn't want to hit it with a lawnmower. And that's when I knew he had a good heart. And so I tell people, never discount a kid. Everybody has a good heart, you know, and if he has a good heart to where he's saving animals so he doesn't run over them with a lawnmower, there's something good about that kid.
yeah, where most of us just keep going and don't even really think twice.
Or they think he's a bad kid or he's going to be a bad person or a bad adult. You
Yeah,
know, he had a good heart. And so I did that for 3 years. And so did Anne. And the reason I bring her into this is because then there was an opening back at what goes around comes around. There was an opening at Lincoln Developmental. And that would have been about 10 years ago. And I said, "Hey, Ian, I'm going to transfer out to Lincoln." Grand Rapids was still in charge of it at that time. Now it's KIC. I said, "You want to go with me? They have 2 openings." So we went out there, talked to them, and landed back at Lincoln Developmental Center. And that was where I ended my career after 7 years there, and I retired 3 years ago.
yeah,
So, and what I took from that was that never, ever, because someone can't talk, don't think that they can't understand you.
right, right, right.
Mm-hmm.
As you wrap up your career, what would you tell young students that are going into teaching for special ed today, being so robotic and what have you?
Advocate for your students and do what you know is right. That the story I have for that is that 3 year class I did where I said I'm going to do it my way. Don't tell me what to do. Is my last teacher evaluation, and you hear about teacher evaluations all the time. The one of the HR people was doing it. I think he was the assistant director or something. And he's watching me work with these kids. And we were doing a science experiment. And every time it came out wrong, the kids would say, "Let's try this, let's try that, let's try this." They were not afraid to try their alternatives. And so we're meeting after that. It's at the end of the school day, and he's sitting across from me. And he goes, "This is where I'm supposed to tell you what you could do better. And he goes, I got nothing. So don't be afraid to advocate for your students and do what you think is right. Instead of teaching geometry with that class, I wrote a grant, got a sewing machine and a serger and thread and fabric, and taught them how to quilt. And here's these street kids, just, you look at them face value, they're mean, they're not nice, they've been in a lot of trouble. They're making quilts for needy moms, for babies, but learning geometry my way. Not doing a book, not doing papers, not doing this, not doing that.
You found a way to communicate to them.
Mm-hmm. Don't be afraid to advocate for your students and do what you know is right and the way you know it's right.
Wow, those are some words of wisdom, and I hope future, special ed, teachers, take it to heart.
Yeah, it's a tough situation right now for teachers, and I've been asked many times to go back, and I'm like, I don't know. I think I'm too old now. I'd rather funnel it through avenues like this, and advocate and help people this way. I don't think I'm ready. And I like doing my homebound with my student, going to his house, working with him.
Yeah.
And I do grandma's preschool with my grandchildren every day too.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. And I look forward to any other chats we might have. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.